then also some have described heart disease as a magnesium deficiency disease, because magnesium is what supports the functioning of the heart. Then if you're deficient in magnesium, you can also have low energy, fatigue, loss of appetite, headaches, or migraines. Now, before we get into lithium, I'm going to tell you something that is not on your slides, but it's important for you to know for your practice, is that if the pH, remember we talked about the pH needing to be between 6.5, that's the first urine pH. You put a strip when you do your first urination of the day, and it has to be between 6.5 and 7.5. And I invite you all to monitor that, your own urine daily for a month, and see how so many factors such as stress, poor sleep, diet, etc., an argument, will affect your pH. And what helps you, one of the things that help you best, in addition to an alkaline diet in general, is magnesium supplementation. Magnesium plus choline citrate. It cannot be, the other cholines don't have that effect. It has to be choline citrate, and the salts of magnesium that I recommend, I've already told you. And those salts of magnesium help you to optimize and improve many functions, physical and mental. Now, lithium. Lithium you've already seen. And lithium carbonate can be used with flaxseed oil to reduce toxicity risk, according to Jonathan Wright. He's a physician who practices nutritional medicine. Lithium carbonate, we know what the therapeutic doses is, 200 or 300 milligrams. It concentrates on the thyroid and blocks iodine uptake. Therefore, it can contribute to hypothyroidism, because the enzyme that converts thyroid hormone T4 into the bioactive hormone thyroid T3 needs iodine. It will also, lithium carbonate will also reduce blood glucose in diabetes. Now, there is another form which is not carbonate, not citrate, which is the pharmaceutical lithium, which is lithium orotate. And it's a lithium joined with an orotate ion instead of a carbonate or citrate ion. And it's far more effective in a smaller doses because it has more efficient transport than lithium carbonate. And the therapeutic effects are like 5 times stronger without the toxicity. It also has gray matter restorative effects because it supports BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It has been used in mood disorders, headaches, seizures, and alcoholism. Now, would you substitute lithium orotate for lithium carbonate? That depends on the case and what else the person is doing. My experience was with, and I give you an example of one case, which I had several years ago, of an adolescent that I saw when he was almost, for the first time, when he was almost 15. He was 14 when I saw him with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. And since age 9, he had been in and out of mental hospitals, extremely bright boy, very aggressive, very violent, and angry especially. And he had been on all kinds of medications with a lot of side effects and so forth. And when they got to me, the father said, we need to do a little miracle. And we did. And we had to go through different stages. And we used lithium orotate, but as an adjunct. the parents at that point did not want any medication because he had not related well to anything. We used basically nutrition, and we used homeopathy, which actually could be the topic of another course. And he responded to those two in a tremendous way. And after 2 years and a half, he was in great shape. After a 10-year follow-up, he's doing great in his life. And only occasionally, when he has a hard time, he takes certain nutritional supplements and occasionally a repetition of a homeopathic remedy. But you see, we didn't use the lithium orotate alone. So it's not equivalent to say lithium carbonate and lithium orotate, and you need to apply it to each case individually. In another case where I used lithium orotate, there was a teenager, and she had like a borderline bipolar disorder and an eating disorder, bulimia. And in her case, it calmed her significantly. But it's not just doing lithium orotate. It's not like a monotherapy like when you give lithium carbonate. And with lithium carbonate, I saw people, teenagers, and I'm saying teenagers because I used to work primarily with children and adolescents, and over the years I worked more and more with adults and older people, especially in the last decade. But this girl gained 40 or 50 pounds. It further had a negative impact on her self-esteem, etc. So there are pros and cons. And there are nutritional adjuncts and alternatives that you can use. And what's good about lithium orotate is that prevents some enzyme reactions that are responsible for sodium depletion that you may have studied in pharmacology and the dehydration effects of other lithium salts. And there is no need to monitor the blood when you do lithium orotate. Now we're ready for quiz 2. And we can please answer quiz 2, and then if there are questions, we'll clarify. Okay, Aideen, has everybody turned in their quiz?
About 12 people have answered, 8 is left.
Oh, okay, we'll take the time. Just let me know when everybody has turned it in.
Okay.
This is Abdullah. I cannot submit the answers because the question or quiz number 2, question number 3 and 4 is not available for us to see and answer.
Oh, Aideen, is there anything you can do?
Abdullah, try to scroll down the poll to get to the number 3 and 4.
But how I'm gonna answer it if I do not have the questions? I only see on my screen question number 1 and 2.
Do you see the poll?
Yes, I do see the poll with the answers, but okay, I could answer from there. Okay, got it.
On the right side of the poll, you can see the scroll. There is a scroll bar, so you can scroll it down. Yeah, awesome, great.
Thank you.
You know, unfortunately, we're going to have time limits for these quizzes because otherwise we cannot cover the material. So is there anybody still doing the quiz? Yeah, we're going to have to move on, and I urge you the next quizzes to complete them. These quizzes are meant to be completed within a small time limit. We may have to do them during a break so that it doesn't take away class time. Now,
Dr. Dolly, I kind of noticed from the slides that the quiz number 3 is not far away down, and I just wanted to mention that it's usually is just one 4-question quiz per session. So I have set the quiz number 3 and quiz number 4 for tomorrow morning and tomorrow afternoon. We won't have it.
It's going to be a little bit different than that because in my format, the afternoon of Sunday is devoted to review so that you all feel comfortable with the material. You can ask questions. I will ask you a lot of questions. You'll have an idea about what the study guide will say, and you'll strengthen and reinforce what you already know. So most probably we're going to be done with the quizzes by noon of tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, and people can take perhaps part of the lunch time for the last quiz. It will depend. I'll go back to the materials and look to see if this is realistic. I hadn't thought of that. Okay, so the essential amino acids, for the essential amino acids, you will have the, is glycine an essential amino acid? And there is a typo here because it's not glialcine, it's glycine. So I made a typo. And glycine is not an essential amino acid. Is tyrosine, tell me who thinks, do you have an icon for raising your hand here that you can answer as a class? Is there an icon for that? Aideen, is there an icon for people to answer a question?
There is a place for raising hand usually on the side.
Because if people could answer that way, because I'd like to know how many people in this course think that tyrosine is an essential amino acid. So how can I find out who's raising their hands?
Well, usually in the past, it was like just people were typing it in the chat and teacher were interacting like that in the chat.
Okay. Okay, and then you know what? We're going to have to, for the sake of time, I'm going to have to answer the questions, which is not necessarily the best way of learning, but I'll have to answer the questions for you. Tyrosine, it's very important for all of you to know because it's the substrate for dopamine and norepinephrine and epinephrine. But tyrosine is formed as a result of metabolization of phenylalanine. So it cannot be an essential amino acid. And I'm concerned that almost half of you thought tyrosine was. Now, proline is not an essential amino acid either. It's a derived amino acid like tyrosine, I didn't expect you to know that, but this tyrosine is something that you learned when you were doing biochemistry, when you were learning amino acids. I don't know how much time was spent on learning amino acids in biochemistry, but this is very important. So I think it's important for everybody to go back and be able to identify the essential amino acids and the derived amino acids that are very important for this course.
I think it would be helpful if you could just clearly tell us what the correct answers are at this point.
I already have.
I'm sorry, I missed
This
it.
is incorrect, and this is incorrect, and I'm going through this one. Taurine is not an essential amino acid. That leaves this.
I don't know what you're pointing to when you say this. A, B, C, or D?
Yeah, I can't see anything that
It's
you're doing.
A. The correct number, the correct answer is A.
Thank you. If you could do that for the last 3 questions, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, okay. And that will save us time too. Thank you. So phosphatidylserine, anything that has a phosphatidyl is a phospholipid. So this one, phosphatidylserine, it's combined with an amino acid, the amino acid serine, which is a very derived amino acid. And that is used, it's a phospholipid that is used as a nutritional intervention for stress, since it helps to balance cortisol. And most of you got it right. So I hope it's clear for those of you who didn't get it right. And what are the major organs that benefit from taurine? And the higher percentage, you know, the brain, the gallbladder, the heart. Remember taurine for anxiety and agitation, because it helps in the, it potentiates GABA. For the heart, in combination with magnesium, as magnesium taurate. And in the gallbladder, in terms of taurocholate, it's important in the production of the bile salts. And what minerals necessary for the conversion of thyroid hormone to T3, to bioavailable? And those are, it's B and D. So this was not very clear. It's, the name of the enzyme is selenium deiodinase. 1 selenium, 2 iodines. So it's selenium deiodinase.
Could you advance the slides to questions 3 and 4 so we could see what you're referring to?
What's that? I couldn't hear you.
Doctor, your slide is still on the question number 1 or 2. If you can move to the next slide.
I have it on the, I'm sorry, yes. Let me see. There are different windows open here, and I'm gonna have to do the Alt tab. Yeah, now I went back to the beginning. See, now this is getting more complicated. This turned out to be, okay, I think now I have it. Yes, now I have it. Okay. Okay, so the minerals, it's the answer is B and D. Okay. Now we're going to shift. For those of you who are interested in the gut microbiome, there are some important concepts here. And all you need to know is what is a probiotic, a prebiotic, and a psychobiotic. And the probiotics obviously were the ones who were discovered first. And they usually enhance the immune system by improving the microbes in the gut, and they inhibit pathogens and toxin-producing bacteria. And so they are helpful for illnesses. And I gave you a list of the most common ones. Excuse me, Aidin, I still have a note saying to move this window away from the shared application.
Yes, doctor. If you can, like the last time, if you can kindly use Alt and Tab to see if that's gonna fix the thing to remove from this page. If not, we need to unshare and share your screen again.
Okay, now we're fine. And so these prebiotics, and so you must have heard of the lactobacillus species. There are different types of lactobacillus. Bifidobacterium, Saccharomyces boulardii, which is the little yeast, which is beneficial because it displaces the bad bacteria, and Bacillus coagulans, and you can get them from cultured dairy products. The problem with cultured dairy products is that they are not what they used to be before many technological additions. In many of the countries of the Mediterranean and the Middle East, they used to use, and in Europe, they used to use cultured dairy that came with live cultures. With the pasteurization, but especially with the addition of sugar and flavors, the bacteria are no longer alive. So if you're going to have a yogurt from which you want to benefit in terms of the beneficial bacteria, you need to choose something which is, number one, organic, and number two, something that has plain yogurt. Sugar destroys these live cultures. So even though they put live cultures on the bottle, it doesn't have live cultures. It's very sad. And a prebiotic, what is a prebiotic? Prebiotic are many of the fibers, many of the vegetables are prebiotics. We saw that honey, raw honey is a prebiotic. Why? Because they are what the bacteria in the gut feed on. And they get fermented by these bacteria, or they are fermented already when you eat them, and they benefit your health because there is a proliferation of more of the good bacteria. So you have oat bran, you have all kinds of vegetables, and prebiotics are also some of the cultured foods like sauerkraut and kimchi and matcha tea, and many foods from other cultures that have come into the United States that are different types. The fructooligosaccharides are very small, complex sugars that that benefit and feed the good bacteria in the gut. Then what are psychobiotics? This is something that comes from the work of Dinan and other people. It's much more recent. In 2013 was the first publication in which it's a type of probiotic. So if I ask you what's a psychobiotic, it's a type of probiotic which can balance the gut bacteria, and it benefits the mind-brain axis. So it benefits mood, anxiety, and cognitive functioning. And two of them that you probably have seen from yogurt are lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. And there is research about that. Now, in neuroscience, there's a paradigm shift in which there is an increasing emphasis in the gut microbiome brain axis. That has consequences for how we understand the pathophysiology of stress-related disorders, psychiatric disorders, and how to treat them. This is another item, for example, in my practice, in which I very often have people do at the initiation of treatment, because so many people come in to the psychologist's office with functional digestive issues. And I have them do a nutrition-oriented stool test with DNA probes, which is something that only came into the market 11 years ago. And that will tell us about how the gut is functioning, how it's digesting the different groups, you know, how it's digesting the fats, the proteins, whether there are autoimmune issues, whether there are beneficial bacteria or bad bacteria, whether there is a yeast overgrowth. The best known one is Candida, but there are other kinds of yeast, whether they are parasites, etc. And it tells us also if there are good levels of short-chain fatty acids, which are protective from colorectal cancer, etc. And these short-chain fatty acids are made by some of the bacteria in the gut, and they have effects on mental functioning. Now, the gut-brain links include the brain, the peripheral, the immune, and the enteric nervous system. It can be called an axis of emotion, in which there is all the time interaction between neural, immune, endocrine, metabolic, and emotional pathways. So, what is the microbiome? The intestinal microbiome are the microbiota genes. They are different bacterial species that have a role in the neuroimmune system, the body's metabolism, immune response, and general physiology. What influences that? Well, this immune status, diet, antibiotic use, infection, and the microbiota interacts with emotion. I remember that about 21 years ago, I saw the first article that came to my attention on how stress unfavorably changes the gut microbiome. So the influences are really two-way. The mind affects the gut microbiome, the gut microbiome affects the mind. And as I was saying before, dietary fiber is fermented by beneficial bacteria, and it produces small-chain fatty acids. There are bacteria that produce bile acids, choline, and short-chain fatty acids. And there are bacteria, actually, that produce neurotransmitters and neuromodulators. And for example, these are two bacteria and one yeast that are capable of producing norepinephrine. Then you get with Candida, Streptococcus, Escherichia, and Enterococcus species, the production of serotonin. There is a bacillus instrumental in the production of dopamine. Among the probiotics, lactobacillus in general is important for the production of acetylcholine, and lactobacillus and bifidobacterium for GABA. So you could say that these two bacteria have calming effects because they are involved in GABA production. Some probiotics also modulate the concentration of opioid and cannabinoid receptors in the gut epithelium or the gut lining. This goes for the person who is interested in CBD and CBD oil. Now, this is about what the gut does in response to a pathogen, and this is detail. And the point is that serotonin levels can be impaired when you have problems in the gut immune system. So, you know, when somebody doesn't respond to an SSRI, we can wonder whether that person in the first place had enough, was making enough serotonin where you could inhibit the reuptake. If the person didn't have enough tryptophan, which is a substrate, probably the person couldn't react well because there was no substrate to produce enough tryptophan to reuptake. Now, you know that the major production of serotonin is in the gut, not in the brain. Serotonin receptors in the gut promote peristalsis, which is the intestinal movement. So, in conclusion, just to know what the situation of the gut immune system is, has a lot of relevance to mental disorders and to how people will react to medication. What's important here so for your understanding, I'm not necessarily going to ask you this, but for those of you who want to understand what you're studying here, the intestinal bacteria can directly communicate. This is gut-brain communication. Can communicate with the central nervous system via the vagus nerve fibers and the peripheral immune system. Number two, good probiotics can relieve inflammation in the GI, in the liver, in the joints, and in the brain. And the gut lining, you need to replenish with good probiotics very selectively. And then you can give broader based probiotics. So what is the interaction between probiotics and psychological states? Well, we said, as we saw before, psychobiotics are the ones that have positive effects on symptoms of depression, anxiety, and perceived stress. And that was shown with healthy volunteers. And in terms of the effect on stress on stomach lining lesions, when they use a certain probiotic mix with 14 different strains of bacteria, they found that there was better recovery from stress. And there was less inflammation, less production of inflammatory proteins. So, as I said before, there is bidirectional signaling. There is communication, two-way communication between the brain and the gut microbiome. And that's all you need to know about that. Histamine. Histamine which mediates allergic reactions, is also a central nervous system neurotransmitter. And you may have seen in your own lives and your own practice that people with allergies have a whole host of mental and emotional symptoms. Why? Because there is a kind of inflammatory reaction. And this is why, for example, although there are histamine-lowering enzymes in the body that form in the gut, somebody may be deficient in those enzymes. Therefore, being exposed to too much histamine gets elevated, and there is a central histamine reaction in which people can get an altered sleep cycle, over arousal, etc. Some people can get drowsy, etc. And there is a finding that there is elevated, increased brain histamine in Alzheimer's. And also in Parkinson's and in schizophrenia. Now, epinephrine and histamine do not cross the blood-brain barrier, but histamine triggers epinephrine release. Therefore, you can see panic symptoms such involving fast heartbeat, sweating, shaking, shortness of breath, nausea, and anxiety. Now, we saw before, this is kind of an expansion that gives just a detail on the fact that psychobiotics can help to improve mental state. And that's all you need to know. You don't need to know anything more. What about lab assessment? This is really for your information. It's very important for you to know, because now there are more and more doctors, and especially those practicing functional medicine and naturopaths, etc., chiropractors, who are doing these tests. And the psychologists in the States with prescription authority can order these tests as well. You know, organic acids give us a very good picture of the metabolic pathways that may be influencing neurotransmitter turnover, immune system of the gut, vitamin status, that is how good a job the vitamins are doing in the body through their metabolites. Then another one, that's a urine test. It's a first urine of the day test. That's organic acids. The GI profile is, as I said, a simple stool sample. And SIBO is a breath test that where you do a swab, and it tests for small intestine bacterial overgrowth. That's simply for you to know, and not the details on it. Now, what about liver detox? This is something you've studied probably in the gastroenterology module, and you probably looked at phase 1 and phase 2. I've already mentioned that in phase 2 you activate, and they are foods that stimulate phase 1 of liver detox, which are the broccoli, the cabbage, and Brussels sprouts, etc. Charcoal broiled meats, high protein diet, oranges and tangerine, and so on. When you find somebody who has a relatively sluggish phase 1, it correlates with an intolerance to caffeine, perfumes, environmental chemicals, and these people are at high risk for liver disorders. Why? because this phase generates very toxic compounds that stay in the body. In contrast, the phase 2 is conjugation of those reactive groups that are toxic. And so all you need to know, as in this phase of conjugation, those reactive compounds become water soluble and they get out of the body through urine. And there are compounds in fruits and vegetables that inhibit phase 1 or activate phase 2 or both. Phase 3, this is something that was described more recently, that takes place in the liver and the small intestine. And it's the transport of conjugated metabolites after phase 2, and involves also the elimination of toxins from the environment that you've incorporated from the environment. Traditional and current detox, for your knowledge, you don't have to really know much about this. And I think the detox and nutrigenomics, it's, I'm giving you 3 basic steps to enhance physical and mental emotional state. It's very important to detoxify your GI tract. You eliminate the pathogens, the bad bacteria, yeast overgrowth, etc. You repair the lining, because the lining of the gut can be inflamed or it can be leaky, like permeable, in what most of you probably have heard, which is leaky gut, in which substances go from the gut into the bloodstream where they shouldn't be, and they create toxic reactions. Then you regenerate, once it's repaired, the lining of the gut where absorption takes place through the Pear patches, which you probably saw in gastroenterology. Then you replenish with the proper intestinal bacteria. Then you also get your liver cleaned up, so you stimulate detox phases 1 and 2, and you clean up toxins in tissues and cells, which are downstream effects. After that, you proceed to do an individualized program of nutrition, which will modify gene expression so that the bad genes don't get expressed and the good ones do. Now, this is only for reference, so you know it exists. I'm not even going to ask you about this. There is a biochemist that has made quite a splash in the psychiatric circles, and he classifies depressions into 5 biotypes, and depending on what biotype it is, they will respond well or not to SSRIs. For example, the undermethylated will, whereas the one with copper overload will not, and so forth. But this is not something that I expect you to remember. Just so you know that Walsh's 5 biotypes of impression exist. And at this point, we're going to take our next break, and we're going to come back. I have like 2:15, so we're going to come back at 2:20 now. And there are many details that I have written here about the plants with pharmacological properties. This is for your own information. The reason I'm putting it here is that if and when you start using botanicals in your practice, you need to know an herb is not just an herb. The colleague who is a pharmacist, Abdullah, will know it's important to know whether something comes from a root, a stem, a flower, whether it's a tea, a tincture, etc. You need to know about the standardization, the doses, the dose frequency. duration of study to validate it, and the safety profile, because botanicals can have very powerful effects. And much of pharmacology was derived from botanicals. So you need to verify that the botanical or herbal preparation you selected has some level of support in the literature. And you must know possible herb-nutrient drug interactions. Now, what is important for you to know here is I have arbitrarily selected, there are many, many classes of botanicals, but here I have selected 3 classes so that you know that are useful for psychologists to know. And this is something that I'd like you to know. They are adaptogens, which is the botanicals that support you in dealing with stress. And there are going to be plenty of examples. If you can just recognize a few of the most important ones, that's enough. Nootropics, they are the ones that enhance cognition. And you may have heard that nowadays there are nootropics also by prescription, such as paracetam. You know, paracetam can also be obtained over the counter. And paracetam comes from a flower, you know, from the periwinkle. So, and there are many others like that. And they are detoxifiers, which are botanicals that promote biotransformation, liver elimination of poisons and toxicants, and kidney elimination. So those 3 classes are important. Now, when we are under chronic stress, it leads to a decrease. One of the effects of chronic stress is decrease in natural killer cell activity, you know, the NK, natural killer cell activity. A lower level of secretory IgA, which is something that you find in the lining of the gut. And you also have decreased activity of the bifidobacteria and the lactobacilli. And you have an increase in enterobacteria such as Escherichia coli, and you have an increased risk of myocardial infarction. And adaptogens are botanicals that are harmless, they have general effects, and they improve your resistance to all stressors, and they help stabilize you. And 2 forms of ginseng are very well known. You know, in Panax, we see more effects on the athlete's endurance. With Eleutherococcus, it's used for mental performance, work under stress, and helps also with the production of hormones. There's another one, Garum amoricum, which is very much used in Europe and in Japan for stress, anxiety, and depression. And it helps to improve concentration, mood, and sleep. There is one lab, a nutraceutical lab in the United States that sells that, and it promotes a sense of well-being. And European clinical trials show their benefits on 90% of patients. There are other adaptogens that are very important, and there are 2 in particular. You know, licorice, which is a mild glucocorticoid. It can mimic steroids and spare cortisol. And with the licorice, you need to use a deglycerized licorice because otherwise it may have some effects on blood pressure, and in some people it may raise blood pressure. Now, the one that has no side effects and that is an excellent adaptogen, which I have used a lot in my private practice, is Rhodiola rosea. I like to use herbs many times because they act in synergy with other herbs and with nutrients. I like to use them in combination. And Rhodiola rosea is very interesting because it acts a little bit like a mild monoamine oxidase inhibitor, a mild MAO inhibitor, and that's a class of drugs that you have studied already. So it has central nervous system effects, it has cardiopulmonary effects because it prevents both catecholamine release and C-amp elevation in the myocardium, and it also prevents adrenal catecholamine depletion, which happens in very extreme stressful states. So it's used in the treatment of asthenia, poor sleep and appetite, irritability, headaches, fatigue, elevated blood pressure from physical or intellectual strain or illness. And it's useful with a generalized anxiety disorder and academic performance. Now, the doses, there are some reports that a low doses has stimulating effects and a high doses have calming effects. I have not necessarily seen that, but one example, I have used this and I still use it on several people who are under stress. I remember one woman, very high driving woman engineer, who had a very high responsibility job, and she had a boss, and this woman also has an MBA, so she was in a job of very high responsibility, and a boss who was very abusive to her. She had this woman boss who was very abusive to her, and she was somebody who was completely averse to the idea of medication. She was responding well to psychotherapy, but this was just stronger than anything. This situation of abuse in a job that at the time she had to have, well, she ended up taking a doses of this formula with rhodiola of 8 capsules daily for a while, until she was able really to deal with this extreme stress and minimize her reactions. She knew cognitively, from a witness standpoint, what was going on, but she no longer had this extreme physiological reactions of insomnia and digestive upset, etc., and anxiety that she had experienced. She did extremely well. I have plentiful examples of people going through situational stress, chronic stress, and burnout. And somebody most recently, who is a current patient, in which her internist put her on Wellbutrin and then referred her to me for psychotherapy. And she had a mammoth level of stress in her life and had a depressive reaction on top and was very fatigued and burned out. And we started with this Rhodiola rosea, and it has helped her to begin the tapering off process from the Wellbutrin. Now, there are other adaptogens that are important, which is ashwagandha. This is one that's very much talked about. Excellent adaptogen. You know, I'd like you to know rhodiola, ashwagandha, and it is a calming herb, and it calms both anxiety and depression. But there is a caveat, because if somebody has an allergic reaction to the members of the Solanaceae family is potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants. That's the Solanaceae family. And that's it. And patterns of adaptive responses with cortisol and DHEA, it's not important for you to remember the classification per se, but these are examples of the use of adaptogens. For example, you can use ashwagandha and rhodiola in the same person, and I give you some of the doses. Then there is acute stress, but there is a recurring poor response. You have also others, such as passion flower, that we're going to go back to. And I'd like you to know about passion flower. Hypericum is St. George's wort. Magnolia and Scutellaria. But I'm not going to ask you about all of those. St. John's wort, most of you probably know. And in the recovery of chronic ongoing stress with poor recovery, when the person is really wiped out and super fatigued, licorice and ginseng. And this is like your last stage of adrenal fatigue. There are also some cortisol modulators. You know, fish oils are very important in stress. And I don't know if you're aware that the American Psychiatric Association lists among the supplementation that they endorse as evidence-based for the treatment of psychiatric patients, the use of omega-3 fatty acids, which are the EPA, DHA. And the dosage really depends on the person, and you really have to have very good quality pharmaceutical level DHA. Now, how do you balance your adrenals and your cortisol? These are diet interventions, and this is very practical advice. So this is something for you to look at, and is you eliminate sugars and refined carbs, and you only have the complex carbs, such as some of the non-gluten grains, nuts and seeds, vegetables. You exercise in moderation. You get between 6 to 8 hours of nightly sleep. And you can do also lab testing, and it's salivary testing to record how your adrenals are producing cortisol around the clock. You can also do thyroid testing. And these are some of the supplements that help you to promote healthy adrenals. Bacopa monnieri is also, this is the Indian name, helps to improve memory. This is a list that you absolutely do not need to remember as a whole. The important thing here, excuse me. It's important for you to know about Centella asiatica, gotu-kola, because this is something that you're going to see a lot in the health food stores. It's a calming. Essentially, you need to know that Centella asiatica is calming, and it stimulates the conversion of glutamic acid to GABA. Then L-theanine, which you probably have seen, which you have in green tea, has a lot of L-theanine. So green tea is not only a good antioxidant, but it can be also calming. Also, chamomile, which many of you may know about as a calming herb. And it's so because it interacts with the benzodiazepine, BZD benzodiazepine receptors. Passion flower. Passion flower is another one that's important. And then valerian. I personally do not use valerian because when people take valerian, sometimes they can feel a little bit groggy. So I'm not even going to ask you about valerian, but theanine, chamomile, passion flower, and gotukola are herbs that are useful to know. Magnolia is also another good one because magnolia, it's a GABA modulator, GABA A modulator. It's a calming. And it's the same one in philodendron also, Relora. This is more for your information because it's too much detail. I'm not going to ask you about that. Then there are the antidepressant herbs. Of the antidepressant herbs, saffron, St. John's wort, which you already know, and this is the evidence, and I'm not going to ask you about the evidence, but just so you know that this is not just a folk study, that this is actually something that's backed by evidence. It's the same thing with the St. John's wort, but you need to be aware that it is a cytochrome P450 3A4 inducer. So with all the psychotropic drugs that have 3A4 metabolization, you need to be careful with interactions. And as far as the nootropics, DMAE is something which is used sometimes with in ADHD. I mean, it can be with for attention and learning, and also PEA, the blue-green alga. Although you also have PEA in chocolate, it's not just alga that contain that. And that has also been used with ADHD and substance abuse and depression. And pycnogenol, which is an antioxidant, has been used in ADHD. Huperzine actually, it has some of the effects of some of the cholinesterase inhibitors like donepezil and galantamine. And it's a Chinese herb. It's an alkaloid extracted from Huperzia. You don't need to know details about it at all. And ginkgo. Ginkgo, yes, it's a better known for memory. Ginkgo more than anything for memory. Detoxifiers, I think the only one that I'd like you to remember is milk thistle, silimarin, which is for liver support. And that's all. And then some of these herbs are herbs of common use, which are onion, garlic, which many cultures are used for various reasons. Garlic is also thought to be a calming herb. And cinnamon is also an anti-anxiety. Cinnamon is also anti-anxiety. But this is only for your information. You're not going to be asked about this. Now, what about kratom? And some of you may have heard about kratom from your patients. They may have asked you, what do you think of kratom for pain? And in traditional medicine, it was used since the 19th century for pain, for opioid withdrawal symptoms, and for recreation. And it does have side effects. It has nausea, vomiting, constipation, and a whole host of cardiovascular effects, insomnia, etc. And it has opioid and stimulant-like properties. This is why people take it for pain. And I give you there the drug interactions. For those of you like Abdullah who were asking about drug-nutrient interactions, herb interactions, it's an inhibitor of two important cytochrome P450, 3A4 and 2D6 that metabolize psychotropic drugs. I personally would be very cautious with this. I've had a couple of patients who've used it on their own for pain, from residual pain, one of them from an accident. He said that he had beneficial effects. I have not recommended that herb, but I wanted you to know that it exists. The FDA says that kratom is an opioid with abuse potential. So there is controversy around it. And I would suggest that if you come across this, I would suggest caution. Now, what about mushrooms for treatment-resistant depression, such as psilocybin? You may have seen psilocybin in the drug of abuse course, if you have such a course still. And psilocybin can alter perceptions and causes changes in the perception of sensory stimuli, in the time, in the self, and it's considered a drug of abuse. However, on the other hand, there is research, and there is one article 2 years ago in which there is a report that it helps to ease depression symptoms in treatment-resistant patients by improving brain responsiveness to emotions. That is, it potentiates amygdala responses. Now, what are neuroprotective agents? These are different kinds of nutrients, herbs, and drugs. At this point, I'm going to limit myself to say that ginkgo, ginseng, rhodiola, saffron, sage, and vinpocetine are neuroprotective agents. And you also see that you don't have to have substances that you take, that you can also use mind-body methods, and most probably some of you are going to do any one of the methods that I listed, such as biofeedback, breathing techniques, hypnosis, meditation, Tai Chi, yoga postures, etc. So this slide is not one to remember. Now, botanicals, they are levels of evidence. They are commonly accepted levels from the most to the most powerful levels of evidence, from the anecdotal reports, reviews of the literature. And this may be a slide for you to be aware of, because the ones that have the best level of evidence may be the ones that you could more comfortably recommend, such as ashwagandha. Berberine is very interesting because it not only enhances the immune system, but it also is considered sedative and antidepressant. Berberine is another one. Lavender, and you can use lavender as an essential oil, and you can put, and as a salt, you can put it in the bathtub, or for a whole body bath or for a foot bath, and it penetrates, and it can be very relaxing and promote sleep in those people who have insomnia. And turmeric, this is something that you probably have heard a lot about. From turmeric, we find curcumin, which is antidepressant, anti-inflammatory, and very well studied, and it's worth recommending. And here are the references, bibliographic references. Now, what about cannabidiol? You may have, if you've studied cannabidiol, cannabis sativa, which is the technical name, you've studied that it has two major components, cannabidiol and tetrahydrocannabinol. Tetra 9 or 9-tetrahydrocannabinol is the main psychoactive one that acts on the nervous system, central nervous system, as a cannabinoid partial receptor agonist, and it promotes a high. There is a synthetic version of that, dronabinol, which is called Marinol, that's a pharmaceutical name, Syndros, is synthetic THC with no CBD, and it FDA approved for as an appetite stimulant, antiemetic in HIV, and for cancer chemo. THC can also be prescribed for patients that are agitated in a terminal phase, for example, with a neurodegenerative disorder, to calm them down, to just help them to transition more smoothly. And I had an experience doing such a thing in concurrence with the physician in charge of a neurology section in New Mexico for a patient who was at the terminal state before dying, in the most advanced stage of multiple sclerosis. And CBD is non-psychoactive. And CBD blocks THC effects in the central nervous system. How is it used? It's used as an anti-inflammatory for anxiety and pain, as a cannabinoid antagonist. And it's mostly anti-inflammatory, anti-anxiety, anti-pain, pain reliever. There's an interesting study in which somebody with psychotic symptoms and a psychosis diagnosis was given a single dose of CBD, and it normalized his brain function based on functional MRI. So it was a very powerful effect. And this is an article that appeared last year. So of CBD, of the effects of CBD, is very important that it has a gut anti-inflammatory effect. And this is research. It modulates the serotonergic transmission and reverses pain and anxiety in a model of neuropathic pain. The most important thing about the uses of CBD oil in practice is that more than 70% of what you get on the market is not bioavailable. So it's not what they say it is. There was an article, I was interviewed by a journalist at Healthline, and the article came out. You can look at it on the internet. If you look up my name on Healthline, or you can Google me, it's an article that appeared, I think, in June or July. And the problem is that people who are doing CBD oil, do you realize more than 70% of the time are not getting the real thing? So it's very important to select the proper vendor and the proper CBD. And if you do, you can get very good results. And I'm familiar with the results as an anti-inflammatory, analgesic, and anti-anxiety. And I have recommended it a couple of times, and but you have to get a very pure product. And you also have to watch for cytochrome P450 interactions. Now we're ready for quiz 3. And we're going to use the break for you to do quiz 3.
When should we return from break?
Doctor, there is no quiz number 3 as a poll inside inside this session. As I mentioned, the quiz number 3 and 4 are already included inside the tomorrow morning and afternoon session each. So do you want them to just answer on the slide, or you just want me to add the quizzes to the today's slide?
Did you change the order of the quizzes? Is that what you did?
No, I just I mentioned that as with the usual, I just put each quiz for each session. So that's what was the common in the past, that each for
No, but I did this on purpose because they pertain to this section, and because I used the whole afternoon session of Sunday to review, ask questions, go over the parts that people had most difficulty with, and so on, so that people get a chance to understand better and better what they have been taught, so that nobody has the quiz 3.
No, quiz 3 is not in this session, unless you want me to go right now and I start putting the quiz, copying it from tomorrow.
Please do. Please put the quiz 3. Yeah, please put the quiz 3. I didn't understand what you had said earlier on. Yeah, thank you.
I apologize, everyone. Creating poll from scratch is gonna take time.
Okay, I'm back. Aideen, when did the students get the quiz?
I'm almost half entered the quizzes. I had to go through your slides and upload those questions to a new poll one by one. Unfortunately, there is no way I can just copy and paste from
Okay,
tomorrow.
then you know what? We're going to have to move on, and this is going to alter the course a little bit, and we may have to forego some of the Q&As at the end of the day, but I would prefer to continue the flow of the course and keep on downloading so that people have this before the end of today. Keep on downloading it now so people have it. And it's not too far distant from the materials, because this is material that we just covered that would have been fresh. And that was the reason to have it where I put it. So let's move on with the slides then. And while we're doing so, is it possible for you, Aideen, to keep on downloading so people have the quiz available?
Yes, I'm uploading the quiz number 3. Do you want me to also put quiz number 4 in today's session?
No, no. Quiz number 4 will be for tomorrow.
Okay, quiz number 3 is going to be uploaded soon.
Just quiz number 3. That would be just fine. Yes.
Of course, sure.
Yeah, and we can move on, and then we'll devote some of the time to clarifying quiz 3 at the end of this process. Okay. Okay. Now, let's see. Now we're going to start with the clinical psychopharmacology and nutrition approach as an integrative type of work. And it's very important for you to have some facts on OTC supplements. You know, I have a very old figure on the sales of dietary supplements. Since 2005, it has more than doubled. Dietary supplements are among the most used, the most widely used alternative and complementary therapies. Now, the supplements that came into the market before 1994, the year in which the passage of the Dietary Supplements Health Education Act took place, they don't have to show that they're safe or efficacious. The ones who were after that do. And one of the issues when patients take supplements is that may use the wrong dose. And they may take supplements with prescription or OTC drugs that are interacting in unfavorable ways, and they don't tell their healthcare provider. The majority of people don't take the PCP, all of what they're taking. And we still have a lack of data on the pharmacokinetics and the pharmacodynamics of botanicals and micronutrients. Every year, there is more and more. And since I started teaching this course, we know a lot more than we knew then. And in fact, one of the areas in which there has been a tremendous advance is in the area of probiotics. Now, one of the problems is that not enough work has been done on the good drug-herb-nutrient interactions, because if that work is grows, people can benefit more and more from the medications they take. And that's, I think, one of the topics that some of you were most interested in. For example, if somebody's on a statin drug, you know, statin drugs are very widely used, is CoQ10. Why? Because statin drugs deplete coenzyme Q10. There is a pathway from cholesterol. The reductase that metabolizes the statin drugs goes into two pathways. One of them reduces cholesterol, and the other one has to do with the formation of CoQ. So those drugs not only suppress cholesterol formation, but they suppress CoQ formation. CoQ10 is very beneficial, and it should not be suppressed. So there are some statin drugs that have coenzyme Q10 added to enhance the results. And if that is more and more the case, there are going to be improved therapeutic outcomes. Now, golden seal is an herb that you can get at the health food store for infections. It has berberine, 2D6, 3A4. Well, 3A5 is not relevant to psychotropics, but 2D6 and 3A4 are. And 2D6 specifically is a frequent metabolizer of psychotropic drugs, such as SSRIs, except metabolism of antidepressants, neuroleptics, and codeine. So if somebody who may have a cold or any kind of infection is taking an antidepressant or a neuroleptic in your practice, they have to be careful with the use of anything containing golden seal. And for that matter, berberine too. Then, see, this is, and that is something to keep in mind, but these others are this actions by drug class. I'm going to go over these interactions quickly because there is a whole lot of material on diet that I think it's going to be very useful for all of you in your practices and that I would like you to learn about. Here you have, you know already that SSRIs interact with St. John wort. Well, they also interact with omega-3, only that the interaction with omega, with the B vitamins is going to be a beneficial interaction. The only ones, substrates, that are relevant here are echinacea and vitamin E for those medications that are metabolized by 3A4. Then the commonly used drug interaction with herbs and nutrients. This is a list. You don't need to remember this, just for your information. Now, medications that may produce anxiety. This is also something for your own use, but not for the exam. What about enhancing drug effects with health and micronutrients? Well, let's look at SSRIs and SNRIs. Chromium is a trace mineral that is involved in the regulation, in sugar regulation. This glycemia has been linked to depression. And chromium may have antidepressant effect in some individuals because it potentiates insulin action. Insulin inhibits norepinephrine uptake and enhances the blood-brain barrier transfer of tryptophan. And so a co-administration of chromium with an antidepressant, especially in a person who has blood sugar regulations, could be helpful. And as I mentioned a little bit ago, it's omega-3 with an SSRI or an SNRI. In order to synthesize serotonin, it requires ample EFA supplies, especially the DHA part of the omega-3s. And this is a more complex one. I think that you just need to look at SNRIs and SSRIs and omega-3. The other ones are not necessary for you to remember. SSRI and SNRI plus omega-3. It's a beneficial interaction. And then, of course, folic acid and fluoxetine and Prozac with non-responders who had low serum folate. Now you get a clear indication that they need to be supplemented with folate, and folic acid plus 5-MTHF will ensure that that person will not metabolize the folic acid in the pathway. SAMI is also considered an enhancer of psychotropics, but as I mentioned to you, it's too expensive one, a supplement to be used routinely. Now, B12 and folic acid are extremely important. And I have seen deficiencies of B12 and folic acid across the board and across the lifespan, from children that I worked with to people who were senior citizens. And I remember one child who came to me with ADHD and dyslexia. And he also had problems writing. And he had already been to a nutritionist, but not the dietitian type, but not a molecular nutritionist. And she did some blood testing, and she missed one of the signs of B12 deficiency. When you do a regular blood chemistry, there is a mean MCV is the mean corpuscular volume, and an elevated mean corpuscular volume is a sign of pernicious anemia, a sign of B12 deficiency. So I gave that child sublingual B12, which is as potent as giving somebody a shot of B12. And within 48 hours, that child was writing without problems, and he was calmer. And of course, there were many other nutritional, psychotherapeutic, and homeopathic interventions, but that particular child responded dramatically, as have had other people who had functional B12 deficiency. See, this leads us to testing, and we need to look at methylmalonic acid, which is a metabolite of B12. When you test B12 in the blood, it's here. You see? When it's elevated in a urinic organic acid, you look at methylmalonate as a sign, elevation of methylmalonate as a sign of B12 deficiency, and you look at FIGLU elevation as a sign of folic acid deficiency. FIGLU is 4-aminoglutamate. And when you find that these two are elevated, or one of them is elevated, you just supplement. In one case, sublingual B12, in the other case, folinic acid. And sublingual is best because it bypasses gut absorption, and some people may have digestive issues that prevent them from properly absorbing these nutrients. The important thing is, you see, methylation has to do, as I mentioned before, with modifying DNA's expression without modifying the genes. And B12 and folic acid quiet the DNA expression of deleterious genes, and they detoxify everyday chemicals. So if somebody tells you about B12 or folic acid in the blood, it's not a reliable test. I was impressed that one of my supervisor in New Mexico, a neurologist, was telling me, and this is already 9 years ago, he was telling me that he never does B12 blood levels because they don't show anything. You see, you could have a ton of B12, you could have elevated B12 in the blood, but if you have elevated methylmalonic acid or methylmalonate, that tells you about the type of job that B12 is doing in your body. Elevated methylmalonic acid tells you that B12 is not doing a good job. So it doesn't matter how much do you have, it matters how good a job it's doing. Now, this is important, and this is important for you to know, because these are biomarkers that are being used now in good functional practice. These are the details, and you don't need to remember the details. However, it's not really hydroxy, it's hydroxo is better. And don't use methylcobalamin because it has very short half-life, but use hydroxo, which is the natural form of B12. And there are some medications that you need to know that drain B12. And if it drains B12, you're going to have some behavioral consequences. So expect to see when you ask people and they report their symptoms, please always ask them if they have been taking antacids, cortisone, antibiotics, anticonvulsant, metformin. In the case of diabetes, metformin is useful in the treatment of diabetes, but it depletes B12. I was recently talking to an endocrinologist who routinely puts her patients on B12 supplementation when she puts them on metformin. Oral contraceptives, and this is another thing that's important for you to know. Oral contraceptives will drain the B complex and the zinc and magnesium. So many of the emotional symptoms with women of childbearing age that have emotional connotations may be partly related to that nutritional depletion. And you need to sort out what's the truly mental issue that may have to do with self-perception, interpersonal relationships, patterns of thinking, etc., from the nutritional substrates of that emotional problem. And there is evidence, of course, that B12 deficit is linked to psychiatric conditions. That's all you need to know. Folate is very instrumental in modulating serotonin, the conversion of tyrosine to dopamine, norepinephrine, and epinephrine, as you saw from the pathway picture that I showed you. And it also modulates opioid and NMDA receptors. And it renders the anticonvulsants less effective, and it makes the antidepressants more effective. So in terms of what to use with the antidepressants like Prozac, you can add a folate that has different kinds of folic acid, for example. Deplin is the pharmaceutical name of that medical food, which is only by prescription, produced by a lab in Louisiana. And that has been written up for a long time already as an augmenting strategy with antidepressants. Stephen Stahl, the psychiatrist and biologist that you may be familiar with, he wrote extensively about the uses of L-methylfolate as a good strategy to augment antidepressant effects. Now, what's important to know is that folate masks B12 deficiency. So if you give folate, it's useful to use folate with B12. But even before you do, if you have a chance to test, to do your organic acid testing, that gives you a more accurate information. So all you need to know is that the use of methylfolate can be a useful augmenting strategy. So for those of you interested in what are the strategies to positively augment the use of medications, folate metabolite of folic acid, could be folinic acid, with an antidepressant could be helpful. Personally, I prefer to use a sublingual form that combines B6, B12, folic acid, and magnesium in one sublingual tablet with many beneficial effects. Now, as I mentioned before, magnesium alters amphetamine pharmacokinetics. It may enhance retention and bioavailability of mixed amphetamines, for example, Adderall, dexamphetamine. And so there is research saying that it may enhance learning and therapeutic response to stimulants by lowering the ratio of calcium to magnesium. And studies have shown that there is a significant association between magnesium deficiency and hyperactivity. Obviously, magnesium calms you, and so there may be hyperexcitation in the absence of enough magnesium. So the study was done in children diagnosed with ADD who also showed magnesium deficiency. And they showed decreased hyperactivity once magnesium was supplemented. So the co-administration of magnesium with amphetamines may be beneficial. Now, how do we test magnesium? Whole blood magnesium is not the way to test magnesium. And that's another thing that I think is important for you to know. It's in one of the slides, and I can't recall exactly where. Magnesium testing, and take note of this, the best is RBC magnesium, which physicians seldom use. RBC magnesium. It's usually done with specialized nutritional testing because it's more expensive. Because if you have enough magnesium in your serum, you could still have a deficiency of magnesium inside the red blood cells, which is where most of your magnesium resides. So the best is to test RBC magnesium. Now, if you already have a deficiency of magnesium in your blood, you're in really bad shape because you definitely will have deficient RBC, red blood cell magnesium, if you already have serum magnesium deficiency. And I'll give you an example. From New Mexico, I was really the neurology unit was really more of a geriatric unit because there were a lot of people with cerebrovascular issues and stroke, traumatic brain injury from falls, degenerative disorders of the nervous system, etc. And I had to see in consultation a man who came in his early 80s who had a cardiovascular accident. And in talking to him, the trigger was really the loss of a very dear friend of his. He was very irascible, very angry. He couldn't sleep. He was constipated. He was tense and very uncooperative. The first thing he told me is, I have OCD. But you know, I bypassed that and we kept on talking. And from the symptoms he described of extreme tension and constipation and insomnia, and I thought that he may be deficient in magnesium. So I ordered some lab testing, and lo and behold, already in the blood, he showed low magnesium. So what they did, on my recommendation, is they did IV magnesium. You know, they put an IV, intravenous magnesium, and this man, within 24 to 48 hours, was like another person. They even had asked me, well, could I prescribe some medication so that he calmed down? Because he was giving everybody a very hard time and he was very uncooperative with treatment. And so you see what a simple solution. And he told me also that some physician had prescribed Xanax, but he wasn't taking it because he really didn't like to take psychotropic medication. This was a very sophisticated man. And so just working with his magnesium levels, and the IV magnesium, of course, was something that he could assimilate very quickly. It went straight into the bloodstream. And he changed, and it also enhanced his cardiovascular functioning, which was very, very important because he had just had a stroke. And this is, you know, vitamin B6, B12, and folate, as I had mentioned to you. Plus, I like a supplement that also contains magnesium, and that is sublingual, because the assimilation is like giving someone a shot, and it goes very quickly and very thoroughly in the prevention of age-related cognitive decline, because those 3 B vitamins plus magnesium have a lot of metabolic functions that are really anti-aging. Now, what about melatonin and psychotropics? Well, you know, there are a lot of people that are being prescribed benzodiazepines, not only by their primary care physicians, but also I have learned when I have seen patients who have moved from another city, who had a psychiatrist, who were given, not at the very beginning, like the books say, when the antidepressant needs to start working, but down the line, you know, I had somebody who was taking fluoxetine and chronically taking also clonazepam. That's a benzodiazepine which has a long half-life. When you do a benzodiazepine, you're going to decrease melatonin. So you give benzodiazepine to calm down and for sleep, but it decreases the hormone that is responsible for you to be able to sleep. So benzodiazepines short term, okay, but long term, they may interfere with melatonin. And this may be why so many people, when they're trying to get off benzodiazepines, they will have trouble sleeping. And you have to go slowly, and this is where you can use nutrition and actually melatonin, whether by prescription or over the counter, in order to facilitate the process. Now, fluvoxamine, Luvox, replenishes melatonin. And this is why the concomitant application of fluvoxamine and melatonin could be recommended. And Haldol could be combined with melatonin to decrease symptoms of tardive dyskinesia. And mirtazapine is something that also will potentiate nocturnal melatonin, and the use of melatonin may be beneficial in certain cases. Mirtazapine is Remeron, if you will remember, that is given, it's not an SSRI or an SNRI, it has adrenergic, it acts via the adrenergic effects. Now, what about nutrient effect of specific drugs? Mood stabilizer, I don't know many people who are using Dilantin these days, but it has very specific effects. The only one that probably is being used now is still Depakote, valproic acid, VPA, and that has effects. You know, you need to remember that valproic acid has effects in terms of decreasing B6, selenium, and zinc. And this may be one of the reasons why the people who are on valproic acid gain weight, because if it chelates zinc out the selenium out of the body, it will block the possibility of making active thyroid hormone, which will depress, of course, thyroid function. Now, this you don't even need to know, this is just information for you. And this is also very technical. Let's see. What you need to know about this, all you need to know about this slide is that the tricyclic antidepressants, which today we're mostly using for pain, they deplete coenzyme Q10 and riboflavin, which is vitamin B2. And the same happens with the traditional antipsychotics. So the TCAs and the traditional antipsychotics are depleting CoQ10 and B2. And these really are irrelevant because those medications have been taken out of the market because of their real poor effects on digestion. And here are also examples of the uses of folic acid added to an ACE inhibitor. This is a blood pressure medication. These are really more for general nutrition, and so we're not going to worry about this slide. And phytochemicals are protective plant compounds that have nutrients, micronutrients, and dietary fiber. The only thing you need to know about this is that the sulfur containing compounds such as onions and leeks and garlics and shallots and broccoli, cabbage sprouts, and other crucifera are beneficial in terms of liver detox. Pomegranate is a very powerful antioxidant. And that's all you need to know about pomegranate. And what about L-tryptophan, taking L-tryptophan versus 5-HTP? I tend to favor tryptophan over 5-HTP because tryptophan is an essential amino acid that has many functions besides being a precursor of serotonin. It's involved in the energy cycle. It makes vitamin B3, enzymes, etc. And tryptophan can be converted to 5-HTP, but 5-HTP does not go back to tryptophan. And so I prefer to use tryptophan with the active metabolite of B6. You can find it in stores sometimes in a formula and sometimes alone. Tryptophan, L-tryptophan plus P5P, which is the active B6, that you need to know, plus some have some of the other B vitamins and magnesium. And you see, one of the good things about tryptophan in combination with B and magnesium for insomnia is that it does not disrupt the sleep architecture.
Doctor, are you going to leave some time for a quiz, or is it going to be done
Yes,
after
yes.
this?
I'm going right now. I'm going to let me look at the following slide to find out what's going on. Yeah, tryptophan and depression. This is just evidence. I think we're going to stop here. Yeah, and let's have everybody work on the quiz. Hmm?
And Doctor, one of the quizzes is not, because one of the quizzes is kind of a blank space. You just ask them to name three item. There is no way in the poll content they can just do that. They cannot just write. It should be either multiple choice or like
Okay, then you know what? When we're going to answer that collectively,
okay.
after they complete the three questions,
Okay.
the adaptogens we're going to answer collectively, and people can remember from whatever they remember, and we can answer that collectively. So they only have to answer three questions of this quiz.
Okay. And
so just work on those three questions. It shouldn't take very long because there is a true and false question. The second you're not answering, and the other two, you just, it's just one answer. And we'll open it up. And if you all can and have the endurance to stay 5 or 10 more minutes after 4, then we can also take some questions.
Okay, I'm gonna close the attendance poll that I have it on. If anyone is still, there is only one person left to answer the attendance. After this, I'm gonna run the quiz number 3.
Great, that's great. Thank you, Eileen.
Of course.
Why is it that we need to stay beyond 4?
You don't need to stay. It's voluntary, and I don't even know if you're going to need to stay. Depends on how long it takes people to respond to the quiz.
Aiden, can you post the quiz answers on Moodle?
Yes, I can. After Doctor gave the answers, I'm gonna post them on Moodle.
Thank you.
Everyone, for question number 2, even though there is no right or wrong answer, just pick something so that you can submit the poll.
And whatever you write is going to be correct because It's the name of 3 adaptogen herbs. And please let me know, Aideen, when everybody's done.
Of course, 2 people are left.
Okay.
Doctor, I guess it's as good as it's gonna get. Would you want me to close the poll and go through the answer?
Okay. Someone's missing?
Yeah, 1 person is missing.
Okay. Go ahead. And I'm pleased to say that most people have answered correctly. Prebiotic, you know, it's true. And I'd like to open up for all of you to name 3 adaptogens, and you can name whatever 3 you want. And I want to be able to, let's see, manage participants to see their written responses. It's manage participants, right?
So we can see the responses in the chat.
What's that?
We can see the responses in the chat.
In the chat, yeah, okay. Oh, in the chat, okay. Okay. Very good. Very good. Very good. Everybody. No, it's not panic. It's not panic erythrococcus. It's, no, it's Panax. It's Panax ginseng. Eleutherococcus is the same as Siberian ginseng. So everybody's getting it right. And you see, these are all very important adaptogens. And you're going to see people are taking these on their own, and they are very powerful. They have pharmaceutical effects. Very good. Very, very good, everybody. Ashwagandha, rhodiola, ginseng, licorice. Nina, you're getting us another answer. You're getting another chance. See if you can answer now. Yeah, very good, everybody. So, you know, I think it's important, and there are a couple of people who haven't introduced themselves. Najib Salmai, you haven't introduced yourself. Can you tell us, do you have sound, and can you tell us what your interest is and where you are located? Or you can write it if you don't have sound. Rhodiola, very good, Nina. Rhodiola is very, very important. And see what else. And it's rhodiola. It ends with an A. Yeah, okay. Okay, I think we're going to you know, at this point, I see that people have all kinds of comments. This has been a challenging format for me too, because this is the first time. The system is different from last year. The quiz system has changed. And at this point, I'd like to open up until 4 o'clock to Q&As, and I'd like to hear from you. And and also I want to tell you about the answers, correct answers. Cellular repair is associated with alkalinization. Most of you wrote correctly. Remember, alkalinity, alkaline cellular repair. Acid, you associate acid with erosion. Methylation has to do with the quieting of bad genes to prevent their expression. It's the modulation of gene expression. And the nootropics, nous in Greek means knowledge. So nootropics have to do with the support of cognitive, they are substances, herbs that support or enhance cognition. And so most of you got it right. And those of you who didn't, you need to review this further. But make sure you know these concepts, because these are fundamental concepts of nutrition that apply to the work that we do as psychologists. So at this point, I would like to open up to whoever has sound to ask questions, and I will answer, or if you wish to have more clarification.
Doctor, could you again one more time just say what's the answer for number 3 and number 4?
Number 3, alkalinization is C. Alkalinization is associated with cellular repair, and nootropics promote, support, or enhance cognitive processes. So the answer to number 3 is C. The answer to number 4 is B.
Thank you.
Okay. And so at this point, I am open to questions. I saw that some people are ready to leave. So if everyone wants to leave, you can dismiss the class if there are no questions. Mm-hmm. One-third of the class solving tech issues, okay. And Rebecca, you need to clarify what that is about. Mm-hmm. Okay. And as I said to you at the beginning, much of this material is for your own reference. It's going to be simplified, and I hope that as we go along tomorrow, which the pace is going to be slower and we're all going to be more familiar with the technical issues, that it's going to run smoothly and you can actually enjoy the experience of learning whatever you're interested in learning. Okay, well, different people seem to have different kinds of challenges here, and I hope that tomorrow in the morning we're going to finish with the slides, and in the afternoon we're going to go over the different aspects. I'm going to be asking you questions and you can ask me questions. And you're going to have a much better idea of what's going to be in your exam at the end of the day. As I mentioned, Nina, as I mentioned, the study guide I will have on sometime on Monday, will be posted sometime on Monday, at the worst on Tuesday, but I expect it to have ready for Monday morning or Monday sometime. And as far as the written assignment, Monica, the assignment is not going to be graded. It's going to be a pass-fail. So unless what you wrote is irrelevant, or put it positively, so long as you write a few thoughts that are coordinated and relevant to the two articles, you'll get a pass. Yeah, you know, Kiara, those are directives that I received. You need to do an assignment and you need to do an exam. And this is the first year it is that way, unfortunately. Yeah, well, thanks for your optimism, Monica, and all of you. I hope that you will believe that this will get simpler and simpler as we make progress tomorrow. So, I don't know, Nina, when the exam is due. And you're all welcome, to the ones who said thank you, and to the ones who felt very challenged by the technical issues and the distraction. Tomorrow is going to be better than today. So enjoy your evening. The idea of this course is to help you pass and to help you learn the basics of nutrition. The rest is for your information and your reference, so that you can indeed use nutrition in your practices. And those of you who want to learn further, I can give you some suggestions on how to do that. Okay, so I think at this point I'm going to disengage unless there are any further comments or questions. It's already 4 o'clock here in California.